Really my pleasure to introduce the panel that you are about to see on Detroit's new era of collaboration. So this was a panel that the mayor of the city of Detroit requested be put together. Look, I'm really encouraged that that's the case, because if there's anything I've learned about the mayor, it is that he identifies what most needs to change to make his city better, and then he builds coalitions and he goes after the change with intensity, and he makes the change happen. Now, the mayor's here today with his panelists to discuss a topic that is clearly now at the very top of the list of what most needs to improve and change in our largest city, but not only in our largest city, in the state more broadly for that matter. And that is the quality of education. But I have to tell you, it gives me great comfort that the mayor has his eyes trained on this. And, because after improving our city on so many other fronts, I have learned that when he trains his eyes on things and puts his will against things, those things ultimately yield and the change will happen. And I'm confident that'll be the case here. But as the mayor has reminded me, he's here not as an education expert, but as somebody who cares deeply about this issue, but he is bringing along with him a series of panelists who know an awful lot about the educational arena. And I think you'll find their discussion on the quality of education and in collaboration to improve education in the city of Detroit really engaging. I hope you enjoy the panel. DT Energy is really happy to sponsor it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the mayor of the city of Detroit, Mike Duggan. President and Chief Executive Officer for Develop Detroit Incorporated and Treasurer of the Board of Education for Detroit Public Schools Community District, Sonia Mays. President of the University of Michigan, Mark Schlessel. Superintendent for Detroit Public Schools Community District, Nikolai Viti. And to moderate the session, columnist for the Detroit Free Press, Rochelle Riley.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're very interested and very excited and eager to get started. I want to encourage you to tweet using the hashtag MPC18. And welcome to the most important session of the Mackinac Conference. I would like us to get started right away, and I don't want to go down the litany of problems because we've been talking about them. I wrote about them right before the conference opened. There are a couple of things that I didn't mention. That's as of 2014, 1 in 14 kids in Detroit are victims of crime. So a lot of them grow up in toxic shock. We know the problems with the schools. We know the problems that you, Dr. Viti, have been faced with. So my first question is, if you were given a blank check from this community of business leaders to fix the schools, what's the first thing, the most important thing that you'd have to do?
Oh, I was waiting for a good question.
Are you still waiting, or did you like that one?
No. I just didn't know what direction you were going to go in. So I would say a number of different things. So let me take them one by one. One, to accelerate teacher salaries, to be in a sustainable way, not a one-time infusion, but in a sustainable long-term way, so that teachers in Detroit are paid the highest throughout the state, and I would say the country. And I would say that's not only for current teachers, but the next generation of teachers, so that it's a profession that people will take on regardless of other opportunities in other fields, because that creates the continuity and consistency that children need year after year from kindergarten to 12th grade. And I think higher accelerated salaries also creates a more competitive process to become a teacher. which then recruits the best and the brightest long term. And then the second area of focus would be to go deeper with serving the whole child. So to attack the issues of poverty. Through the K-12 system, to offer stronger and broader wraparound services related to mental health, healthcare, nutrition, childcare, and early learning. So that you are not only focusing in K-12 on literacy, math, science, and social studies, but you're also addressing the issues that prevent children from focusing on education on a day-to-day basis, but doing it through the school system because that's where children are every day. And then you're allowing them to focus on why they come to school every day, which is to receive a high-level education.
That makes perfect sense. And since this is a collaborative team, Sonia, you've got that same blank check. What did he leave out?
Yeah, I would ask the business community and that big check to focus it on the physical state of our buildings. I think Dr. Vitti covered well the intents around educating the child. He's put together a phenomenally qualified and experienced educational team, but this school district exists in an environment where we have several decades of poorly maintained buildings, deferred maintenance, and tons of vacant buildings for which there's no clear purpose. And I don't know that I can overstate how much of a hurdle that has become in consistently educating and providing a safe environment for our students. I mean, just this week, for anyone who's been following, we had to close schools 3 days.
Every day that we've been here on the island, they've not been in school in Detroit.
Yes, because it was, the weather was too hot and many of our schools lack air conditioning. And so if you just kind of think about the random disruption that causes, and you multiply it out across a whole school system, that's what I would ask to check for. And I often tell Dr. Vitti this, I feel bad for his team because they have such enormous challenges in front of them with the basic educational mandate of the students, but they're also asked to be like, superior managers of property and buildings in an environment that is like no other across the country. And it's not their core competency, it shouldn't be. And I do think it's a place where the broader community can really step up and collaborate and help solve some of the problems we have with our buildings.
Now we're going to spend the bulk of our time on the collaboration and the partnerships and some of the things that are working. But before we do that, we have to deal with not how we got this way, but why it continues to be this way. So Mayor Duggan, no one has done more to literally bring back the city of Detroit, your hometown, than you. And this is a community statewide that created a grand bargain to save the city, to save the art and the DIA. So why can't we save the children in the Detroit schools?
Yeah, I mean, we know the history. We had 10 years of a state-appointed emergency manager. During that time, we lost half of the enrollment in the Detroit public schools. They eliminated career technical education, eliminated art, eliminated music, talked about cutting deficits, and all that happened was children continued to leave. And I've been so impressed. I mean, Dr. Vitti has now been on the job exactly 1 year. Sonia and the elected school board have been in place less than a year and a half. But we should not just think about this as Detroit when you say, how did this happen? This isn't just Detroit. What's happening in education right now, and these are cold things to say, but if you look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress for white students in the state of Michigan, 4th grade math and reading level, in 2013, we were 14th in the country. Last year, 46th in the country. Now, if you had sat down in 2013 and said, how can I sabotage Michigan's future and get them to drop from 14 to 46, I'm not sure you could have accomplished it. And yet it was being accomplished at a time when Lansing cut the personal income tax because we needed to pay less, cut business tax, cut personal property tax. Some of it was partisan, a lot of it was bipartisan. But you think about in our own lives, if a spouse loses a job, you get your hours cut back at work, the last thing you cut off are your kids' soccer or dance. You sacrifice first yourself and you preserve your kids. Somehow in this state, we have cut funding for our children's education year after year while taking tax cuts along the way. And so I think we need to think about this not just in terms of Detroit, but at what point do we as a state say we have an obligation that our children have better opportunity for us, not less opportunity? And I think that's something we all have to address.
Dr. Schlissel, the only people who keep up more with future kids who grow up to be something besides college presidents are newspapers, because we need the readers. So you're looking at these situations with these kids where 90% of the kids in the Detroit public schools in 3rd grade have trouble reading, and if they don't get to grade level next year, the legislature has said hold them back, even though Dr. Vitti is short about 180, 190 teachers. He's going to fix that, and he's working on that, but it's these impossible situations. When you see that from the tower in Ann Arbor, what are you seeing and thinking should happen?
Well, you know, there are talented kids in all these communities. So there's no evidence I've seen in life as an educator that talent is not uniformly distributed across the population. So, you know, our job is to identify talented kids, even though they're in challenging circumstances, and help them make the transition to higher education. One of the things we're invested in now is a new pathway program called Wolverine Pathways, building a pipeline of students. We began in Ypsi and Southfield, and now we're in Detroit. The idea is to start with kids in 7th grade, partner with public schools and public school teachers, work with the kids on weekends during their school year, and then on the Michigan campus during the summer, working on math skills and language arts and social studies and science, but also give them the kind of mentoring that you don't get necessarily if you don't come from a community where other people have gone to college. And the idea is to get them ready to apply and to be competitive in their applications. The first cohort of these kids is now on the Michigan campus. We have 80 or 90 students who successfully applied to Michigan this past year through this program. The darn problem is we're a big university and we're a relatively wealthy university, but we're just a university. So how do you take this to scale? You know, how do you provide that kind of support and mentoring and extra help for kids who are talented, who are willing to work hard, with parents that want to be involved at the scale of the state of Michigan? And I agree wholeheartedly with the mayor. We've gotten away from making investments in our own future. It may feel good to tax ourselves less and to point out how the climate for business has improved because taxes have gone down. But personal income in our state over the last decade has gone up over 30%. Government spending has gone up 13%. So there's sort of a net change in what we're doing with our resources. We're keeping more for ourselves, we're investing less in our future, and that has to change, otherwise we'll fail.
Now, while we're working on solving the big problem, there are ways that people are doing things that can be expanded. Every person who owns a business in this room ought to leave with one idea that they can participate and do something, because this is a problem for everyone. So I'd like you to talk about some of those partnerships that work. And Dr. Vitti, I know that you've seen sort of the gamut in Detroit, and like the mayor said, they're in several school districts, but talk about something that really works, that people ought to do because they can.
Well, one at-scale strategy that I think is a great equalizer is the Detroit Promise. I think too many of our students work hard and don't necessarily see the end result, the end in mind when you're setting goals. And socioeconomic background should never be the obstacle for a child to go to access higher education. I think the Detroit Promise is a concrete investment, a concrete strategy that's actionable, realistic, pragmatic, and real for children and families. Meaning, once you obtain that certain GPA, certain score on the SAT, then you know that's a ticket to somewhere. And it's a ticket to do better than the generation before you. And I think that's the right business investment and something that we just need to scale so that as more children and families learn about it, it can be accessed with greater consistency. The other thing that is happening in Detroit is the investment in career technical centers through workforce development at the city level. That is a way to create a pipeline for our high school students right into the world of work. And another something that's concrete, and I keep on saying concrete because there's lots of things that are happening often in a piecemeal type of way, unaligned to the district's true gaps. They make people feel good, and individually it does make a difference for children, but we need to get to a point of scale. What does it mean to create the kind of opportunities that exist at CAS and Renaissance at every one of our high schools? And that's what we have to start thinking about. And I think the investment through the workforce development and companies investing in new infrastructure, new programs at schools, mainly at Randolph right now and Brighthawk, allow students to go through the core curriculum, still get a standard high school diploma, no different than any other high school student, but start to begin to obtain skills that can translate into employment right out of high school and begin to address the talent job gap that exists in Detroit with industries that are based in the city. And so it's just a matter of trying to replicate that to multiple career academies, to nursing, engineering, you name it. If there's a need in the industry, we can build the program at the high school level to create that pipeline. I think those are some examples of business partnerships and city collaboration and even university opportunities with dual enrollment and career academy build-outs that we just need to expand in the city right now.
Mr. Mayor, same question. You're a partner builder. What types of things should be happening where there should be more?
Well, you know, and the things that Dr. Vitti mentioned, I want to thank Sandy Barua and all the business people who supported getting the Detroit Promise started. Every child who graduates from a high school in the city of Detroit who gets accepted to a two-year community college has that tuition guaranteed to be paid for, and if they get a 3.0 and a 20 on their ACT, four-year university paid for. So you can say to children at 11, 12, 14 years old, if you work hard enough, you can go to college. And then Tanya Allen and Dave Meter and everybody who's helped fund our different CTE programs. Those collaborations have worked. We're now about to embark on one that's different. And in this city, we've had a history going back to 1999 when Dennis Archer took over the Detroit Public Schools in a collaboration with John Engler, and we've been through one trauma after another relative to mayoral roles. Should they run the school, should they not run the school, et cetera. I've taken the position from the beginning, I don't want to run the schools. The educators are here to my left. What I want to do is find a way to facilitate the educators doing their jobs, and I am really pleased at what we're about to roll out in Northwest Detroit, where we have gotten the charters and Dr. Vitti and his team together in a room to say this. This morning, 30,000 children got up in the city of Detroit and went to school in the suburbs. We got 100 DPS-CD schools, 100 charter schools, and 30,000 kids and parents decided none of those was a good enough choice. We got to change that. And in many cases, they're being bused 30, 45 minutes away to school districts with lower test scores than the school in their neighborhood. And so you're going to see us roll out with 4 charter schools and 6 DPS-CD schools on a loop in Northwest Detroit that if you live in that neighborhood, you can go to your closest school and the bus will take you to any one of the 10 schools on that loop. We'll make choice available to everybody whether you have a car or not. And for those parents who get off work at 5 o'clock and their child gets out of school at 3 o'clock, and you're worried about what happens in those 2 hours, we're going to run quality after-school programs at the Northwest Activity Center in the middle of the loop. And we have a vision that I expect to be in place this September, that your child will walk up to the closest school, take a bus maybe 3 schools over to have that school that you want that's got drama or math or whatever specialty. They'll swipe off the bus when they get off, and the parent will get a text. Your child's at school. After school, they'll swipe on the bus, the parent will get a text, they'll get to the Northwest Activity Center, and the parent will say, your child's at your after-school program. And at 5 o'clock when that child gets on the bus, the parent will get the text, your son or daughter is on their way back to their main school. What would happen if the entire community came together and embraced the children with those kinds of school choices, those kinds of after-school choices, and DPSCD and the charters work together? And so my role is to facilitate the cooperation and then get the children safely to the schools and let the educators do their jobs. And we're very excited about the prospects of this.
That sounds good to me. Sonia, a minute ago, Dr. Vitti mentioned the whole child, and that's one of the things that we don't necessarily always talk about where we're talking about the Detroit Public Schools. So yes, we have a problem with Michigan education, and for people who don't know, it's because people have said they believe in Michigan education when they have not. We have thought that college was not necessary because you could get a job without going to college. We have not believed in funding schools the way they should, not just in Detroit, but across the state, because we have rural districts that are having some of the same problems. So let's talk about the other things that kids need. We're talking about kids who have all kinds of issues beyond, you know, having to learn, wanting to learn. Something Dr. Vitti said in a panel yesterday, where he invited everyone in this room and everyone on this island to go into any preschool in the country and look at these children and see how eager they are to learn and where they are and then what we do to them over time. What do we need to do for the kids besides provide reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time, I don't spend nearly as much time as Dr. Vitti on the more tactical aspects of the school system. I actually spend a lot of time thinking about, at a really high level, what we can do to inspire more people in Detroit to really, truly care about our students, right? So it is really easy for me to care about these kids. When I look at these kids, I see myself. I see someone who grew up on 7 Mile in Detroit, who went to a public school, who was able to show up in high school for college application day, and the University of Michigan had a table, Michigan State, and ultimately, you know, I was able to take that public education and go to our flagship public university. So I see hope, I see opportunity, I see beauty in our kids, and it's really easy for me to see that. And I spend a lot of time thinking about, like, how do we figure out how to inspire more people to look at our children and see that promise in them? And one of the parallels that I often draw is, you know, as a school system, we need to sort of get to where the broader city and its revitalization conversation is. If you talk to anybody who has come newly into Detroit, one of the first things they tell you about is they tell you their story of Detroit. And usually it's something like, my grandfather lived in Northwest Detroit, he went to Detroit Mumford, you know, they'll explain that they moved away. But what they're really doing when they do that is they're putting themselves in this narrative of what's happening in Detroit. They're putting themselves right in the center of the vision of what's going on, and they're saying, you know, I belong here, and here are all the reasons. And that makes it so much easier for that person to then go and do the little things that you have to do to support what's going on more broadly. Mayor Duggan has run a phenomenal administration in the last 4 years, but that's not enough, right? You need the people who are going to invest. You need the people who are going to create jobs. You need the people who are going to say, you know what, I'm just going to go support that new restaurant, right? That's what I'm going to do. That's my contribution. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about, like, what does that look like? How do you bring the schools into that vision so people are also inserting themselves into the narrative of why the schools matter as much as what's going on with Detroit revitalization?
So let's talk about race. I literally heard 7 people stop breathing. The column I wrote this week was not an accusation, it was a question, where I'm just trying to figure out how it's possible that it's not that 90% of third graders in the Detroit City schools are not reading at grade level now. It's that that has been true for 10 years. It's not that the NAEP scores are low this year, it's that the NAEP scores are low every year. And we've got this stellar business community that is proud of Michigan and proud of what's happening in Detroit, and we should be, because when I came to Detroit 17 years ago, as my grandma would say, Lord have mercy. It is amazing where we are and where we've come. So I'm trying to get a sense, and I want you all to tell me, because of your interactions with people and the folks that you talk to and your students, particularly the ones in your program, Dr. Schlissel, who come over to Detroit and work and are a part of this great fellows program. how much of that is because a lot of our leaders do not look at our children and see themselves, do not connect in a way that makes them think, oh no, the Detroit public schools are not about the principals who stole some money or about this adult thing or that adult thing, but it's about those kids. And is it possible that even if it's not intentional, that it has something to do with the fact that these kids are African American?
I think there's a huge amount of unconscious bias in the world, let alone the conscious bias. And it's part of the challenge. I think, for us in building a campus community, it's very important that that's a community that looks like the public that we're serving. People learn by experience, and if we can put people from Detroit next to people from the suburbs, next to people from the Upper Peninsula, they're going to learn about one another in ways that will color, no pun intended, the way they look about the rest of their lives. That's the real importance why we talk about diversity all the time at the university. And to be honest, we've been failing. Since Proposal 2, we've really not succeeded in capturing the racial and ethnic diversity of the state of Michigan. There are programs we have in place that are working towards those goals, that are within the confines of the law, but we're convinced that we can't be an excellent educational institution unless we can capture the full breadth of diversity in our society. We are becoming a majority-minority nation, right? So our customers, our clients, our business partners are going to represent the diversity of our society, a globalized society, and if we can't capture that on our campus, our students won't learn what they need to in college. It's really a top priority for the university.
Dr. Vitti?
So people often ask me, what were you most surprised about when you took the job and started to work in the system? And I often say I was shocked, horrified at the lack of systems and processes for traditional public education. Traditional public education has always been, and I hopefully will always be, the vehicle for social change, for social justice, for equal opportunity in this country. And walking into the system and seeing a lack of systems and processes is a testament of the lack of belief in what children can do. And there is a racist element to what has happened. Children in Detroit have been treated like second-class citizens. When a system is allowed to be run over a decade by individuals, and it's not about one individual, but individuals that had no track record of education reform, no local governance structure to address immediate concerns and issues by the community through an elected board. And year and year of low performance, a lack of growth, drop in enrollment, facilities that are not kept up, that would never, ever happen in any white suburban district in this country. And that is a testament of race. Because this country would not allow that. And we see signs of that in Flint, and we saw signs of that in New Orleans after the flood. I mean, we have multiple examples of this. And there is oftentimes very strong rhetoric about equal opportunity and public education. It's time to actually support it financially, but even with the right policy, even when we talk about we need accountability, we need accountability. But I often say to people, when you inject the accountability, what are you doing for support? Because for best practices for every unit of accountability, there has to be a corresponding unit of support. And for schools that are deeply struggling, basically because of poverty, there needs to be extra degrees of support. And that's what we haven't figured out. So often there's a conversation in the state of Michigan, and even throughout the country, that, well, we need more accountability. Well, we need more accountability, but you also need more support, because where does accountability move to? More choice. We've seen choice in Michigan. We've seen choice without guardrails. That hasn't worked. So that's not the solution after you hold people accountable. So let's get back to the root cause, which often is linked to race, linked to poverty, and let's invest in the whole child, regardless of that child, regardless of zip code, regardless of race, and we'll actually see what children can accomplish. We have yet to see what children in Detroit can accomplish at scale, because we've really never funded it appropriately, provided the right kind of support, and ensured that the right governance structure and leaders were in place to ensure that the system moved forward in the benefit of children. We have used Detroit and Detroit children as political, often pawns, and gamemanship has happened politically in this state. And that's what I've seen walking in.
I think Dr. Vitti covered it well.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, you and I have had lots of conversations about education and about what the city can do, not the city government, but the city, which means all of its business leaders. In that column, I mentioned that perhaps there's some novel way to do something like make any developer who wants to touch any building in Detroit adopt a school. Is that a crazy idea?
Well, there's a few people who remember that in 1999, I stood on the stage and asked everybody's help. I spent a year where I volunteered as the deputy superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools to fix the buildings. And there were 270 public school buildings, Dr. Vitti, if you could believe that, less than 20 years ago. We had $80 million to spend in about 11 weeks of a summer vacation, and we had the contractors in place, but I couldn't figure out how to supervise all these contractors at 270 locations at once. I stood on this stage and I asked the business community, would you each adopt one school where you go out on site, you supervise the contractors, so in addition to the reports I'm getting, I have your eyes and ears. They lined up out in this hallway. We got people to adopt all 270 schools, some because they graduated from those schools and they wanted their own schools, some because they felt some moral obligation. But when people started to engage, something happened. The racial division in this country melts away when we start to spend time together. And so you had some pretty hard-bitten corporate executives started spending time in these schools and talking to these children. Not only did the work improve, they signed up for mentorships. They figured out how to do job opportunities. They put in playground equipment. Folks bonded. And so this is something that we have got to continue to work on together. I am convinced that we have lots of business people of goodwill. You look at what's happened on Randolph. I mean, this is unbelievable. We've got just terrible skilled trade shortages for all the construction going on, and the emergency managers let the place that used to train all the plumbers and carpenters just completely disappear. We had to build it from scratch. So you had folks from several companies in this room put up $10 million, rebuilt the inside of that center. Dr. Vitti, who had to set up a whole new system, got 300 students to enroll a half a day in their base high school, a half a day at Randolph, and you see the excitement going on. But then we realized once we've got $10 million of equipment and trainers, at 3 o'clock when the kids go home, we can bring their parents in, adults who can use the same equipment, and we can use them in the second shift to train the next generation. When we gave the business community a way to participate, the business community participated. And I think it's up to us to figure out more and more ways. But what I've seen is if you can show the business leadership of this community that they can participate in a meaningful way, and especially, as Sonia says, you get people who spend time with these beautiful children, their hearts open up, and they do become true partners.
What happened to the program that used to exist, where they adopted the 270 schools?
So it went on for about a couple of years. In fact, some of the schools, it was 4 or 5 years, but I don't know, about the third emergency manager, it wasn't valued in the process. You know, I know my wife in one school was herself, she was a school teacher, she was driving down once a week just to to help students at a 6th grade level read once a week, and they weren't even bothering to call her back to come in and volunteer. So, you know, we had a lot of people running the school system that were not educators. I don't think you would see that happen again today with the leadership that we have.
Let's talk about the collaborative effort a little more, because there are people who care, there are people who are reaching out, and we may be at that great watershed moment where everybody does want to join hands and do something. I am really, really hopeful for that. Michigan business leaders, all types of folks are saying, you know what, we can do this. What advice do you have for this community that's here, the folks who aren't here but are going to hear about it, for them to dive right in? What should they do? Everybody on the panel. We can start with you, Dr. Vitti, and come back down.
So one thing that we've created is a school advisory council at every school. And that is a way at a local level, at a school level, to get involved. Often people find it difficult just working with the district central office to find a way to connect and see an impact. And so the School Advisory Council, 51% or more of the committee has to be made up of non-district employees. So this is an opportunity for local business leaders to get involved, parents, community members, to serve on this committee. In addition to students will be on the committee, teachers, union rep, and the PTA president. But this committee will problem solve with the principal. Principal leads the committee. We'll create a school improvement plan, a discipline plan, and an attendance plan, which is linked to an enrollment plan, to just problem solve with the principal on how to improve this school. And I think that's an opportunity to, what I often say is, to learn about the beauty and the beast of traditional public education. Because it is. When we say traditional public education, we're talking about all kids, regardless of circumstance, regardless of obstacles, and that makes it hard. And so when you're on that committee, you start to see the beauty of what happens every day, but you see the real challenges at the same time, and you begin to offer the principal ideas based on your experiences. You offer resources, you offer additional people that you know your network can be leveraged to have more people be engaged in that school. So I think that's a concrete way for people to get involved. But beyond that, it's the Detroit Promise. It's companies that are already starting to put their toe in the water. We needed them to jump in the pool by sponsoring a school, being a part of a beautification process, and getting involved more with our Tier 3 intervention for literacy and math as tutors to be trained. We're working on that as an initiative. But I will continue to echo what I have said earlier as far as the business community is concerned. Our children need internships. They need externships. And we're starting to see that at Randolph and Breithoff, but our students need exposure to opportunities beyond what they see at school, in their home, in their community. Our kids are talented, our kids are perseverant, they're hard workers, they just need connection. They need an opportunity, and I think once they see those opportunities, they will take advantage of them, and I think that's the other opportunity in the business community.
Okay, Dr. Schlitzer.
Yeah, you know, what I'd say in two different areas. One is there are many folks here. There's a group, I'm on the executive committee of Business Leaders of Michigan.
Yes.
And you know, this group has tackled some of the largest problems our state has had and been very effective working with the legislature, working with the governor, trying to help the state get it right in terms of how it spends its resources and how it applies its regulatory strength. The business leaders are really focusing particularly on the K-12 education problem. And behind the scenes, I'm sure many of you are involved in putting together a coalition that will now support a whole platform of changes in the same kind of consistent way they've done when they've been successful with infrastructure and pensions and good governance efforts. So the business community is going to take this on, and they'll do it the same way that they've been successful with other economic issues, because it's a part of our economic future. The other thing, in line with what Dr. Vitti said, is we've taken this concept of a Detroit Promise or a Kalamazoo Promise and made it a statewide thing. So the thing I'm proudest of that the university's done the last 4 years is called the Go Blue Guarantee. And that's a financial aid program that guarantees any student in the state of Michigan, if you get accepted to the U of M and you come from a family in the lower 50% of family income, so half of our families, will guarantee you at least 4 years of full free tuition, full financial aid, plus whatever else you qualify for. So the beauty of that isn't, to help the kid who's sitting at his table trying to apply to college. It's to take the 7th grader who's sitting at the dinner table with mom and dad, and they see this kid has a spark to them. They actually like to read. They like to do math problems. They want to go on an education, and mom and dad are terrified. How on earth are they going to pay what seems like a daunting amount of money? And to be able to tell that family, you take care of your kid, have him do well at school, and we'll all chip in and help pay for his or her education. And that's something that many people in this room have helped with through philanthropy. That's the only way we can do it.
Sonia?
I think I'd add a measure of patience. And so what do I mean by that? DPSCD is an organization that is having to reteach itself how to do things. So it's spent the last 20 plus years building up, to Dr. Vidi's point, systems and processes that are really in response to having to do less with more, response to contraction, response to disinvestment. And we're trying to build a new organization now. And it takes time to change those systems, that way of thinking. Dr. Vidi moves extremely fast and has done a phenomenal job in the last year of putting in place that sort of cultural shift that you need to start thinking about things from the prism of collaboration and from growth. And from being able to be able to aim higher, but it will oftentimes not feel like it's moving as quickly enough. And for people in this room, business leaders who are accustomed to things moving with a snap of your fingers, I think just a measure of patience and understanding that the leadership at this district wants collaboration. We are teaching ourselves to be really good at collaboration. We have a really healthy dose of optimism about what's possible if we all can work together. But it, at times, may move a little more slowly than I think people may like. So just a dose of patience as we continue to figure things out.
Mr. Mayor?
You want to know what you can do? Go to the governor's debate. And we need to talk about the politics of this country and this state. Did you see the AAA poll that came out this week? 89% of the people in Michigan think the roads are bad. 62% are not willing to pay anything for them. Okay? That's where we've gotten to as a country. Like, we have no responsibility to pay the bills. We're running $1 trillion deficit nationally at a time of economic prosperity and shoving the bills down to the next generation. America has never done that before. And I'm going to say this again. Detroit may be here on the achievement scores, but I tell you what, the rest of the state school districts over the last 14 years have been going like that. And if you go and look for an honest answer. If you've got somebody up there saying, I'm going to cut the personal income tax to put an extra $50 a year in your pocket, say, okay, well, while you do that, what are we doing about the children? Does somebody have the honesty to say, here's what we got to do to invest? And it isn't strictly money. There's got to be accountability out of the schools at the same time. Does somebody have the honesty to tell you the truth that we have to invest? Or are they telling you, don't worry, we can cut the taxes, we don't have to do everything else, and everything's fine? Because the reality is this: people are so inundated with information and are so busy that the average voter is not paying attention like they did 20 years ago. But if the business leaders who understand how critical it is for Michigan to compete, to have good education, if you don't hold these candidates accountable for taking responsible positions, nobody's going to. So everybody here can start by listening to these candidates tonight and then giving them your feedback tomorrow and letting them know what you want out of them is an honest conversation on how we're going to improve the schools.
So we covered partnerships, we covered the past, present, and future. I'm going to ask you to do something unusual. I said I wouldn't hurt you, and it won't hurt. I just want you to take 20 seconds each. You're an 8-year-old third grader in the Detroit Public Schools, and this is your business community. And I want each of you to tell them what you need them to know and what you want from them. But you're an 8-year-old third grader. Sonia?
Oh. I would have to go first. I'll go back to the answer that I led with. Help us fix the schools. Help this 8th grader know that I get up every day and go to a school that is safe, secure, doesn't have a leaking roof, doesn't have leaded water at the water fountain in the faucet.
Dr. Slickle?
I'm thinking back to when I was in 3rd grade. That's a long time ago.
Not long.
But from my perspective, I would have wanted to be able to go with them to work and see what they do, and really be inspired by the different types of opportunities that are out there. Because what do I know? I'm just a 3rd grader.
Targeted at this room.
At this room. They're right there. You talk to them.
I would say, if I'm a 3rd grader, the average 3rd grader in Detroit, what I say to you is, I want the same thing that your child wants.
Yes. That's absolutely true.
I may not have your privilege. I may not have the color of your skin. I may live in a different zip code. But I want the exact same thing you want for your son, your daughter, your grandchild, your niece, your nephew. That's what I want.
This is a great superintendent. It was perfectly said.
I want to thank you all so much for coming to the most important session of the Mackinac Conference.